Hello, I'm David Zavislin, and this is another Nolte CAD training production. So for all those of you online with us today, welcome. Today's session, I will be showing annotative blocks and the combination of those with external references. And this comes from some questions that I was asked by some of the fine folks in our Salt Lake City office. They were trying to use some of this newer AutoCAD 2009 technology, and we just came up with some understanding issues. So the goal of today's session is to help you get a better grasp of the concept of annotative objects. And this is not just blocks. I am covering blocks today, but this also applies to annotative text and annotative dimensioning as well. I'm going to start off with a quick poll here just to see what your familiarity is. So on your screen now there should be a simple yes/no question of have I used annotative text or blocks before? So go ahead and answer that, and I'll kind of keep track of who's clicking and picking here. There's still a couple that haven't voted yet. I guess that's all I'm going to get. All right, I'm going to close the poll and then show you what the results are. So it looks like we got a good 50-50 split here. Half of you have used annotative objects and half of you have not. So this will be a good introduction for those of you who have not used these. Probably another question I should have asked, but I didn't think about it till just now, is were you successful in using annotative text and blocks? Maybe I'll ask that question next time. Jumping into the PowerPoint presentation, let me quickly go into the syllabus of what I'm going to be covering, and I've got three main topics I'm going to work on today. We're going to start off talking about annotation scales, and this is that little button that pops up down on your status bar in AutoCAD where you can pick what scale you want to see your line weights or annotative objects displayed at. And that's annotation scales, and we'll talk about how to set these up and manage those. We're going to create an annotative block, and I'm going to do different versions of the block. I'm going to do one version where the entire block is annotative. We'll do one version where the block has an annotative attribute, and then I'll do another variation of it where the block has annotative text embedded within the block. And once we go through those exercises, I'll finish up and we will then reference our drawing with our annotative blocks and talk about the behavior of what's called an annotative drawing is what we're going to look at on that. So those are the three main topics that I will be covering today. A few more PowerPoints here, so bear with me. For annotation scale, I'm going to use the scale list edit command, which is also the customize button on the annotation scale toolbar or the flyout. And that allows you to modify the annotation list. I do recommend cleaning up the list and removing all of the scales that you are not using. For example, removing all of the architectural scales when you're working on site plan drawings. We don't need to see those. And also making sure that all of your drawings are using the same annotation scales, because it gets real confusing when we start X-referencing drawings with annotative objects and they are using different scale names. And what we'll find is I can't get two drawings to interact the same way because they may have different scale names. So we do want to standardize our project, our drawings within a project, to all use the same scale values. A quick way to fix a whole directory of structures, there's a command a program that we got from Autodesk called the Cleanup Scales executable file, and I'll show you where that is located and how to install that. So actually let me do that right now. So I'm going to jump over. I've got a session of Windows Explorer running, and the location for this is in the Q drive under the CAD directory. There's an Update 2009 directory, and in there is a folder called AutoCAD Scale List Cleanup Utility. And what you do is we copy these three files to your Civil 3D or Land Desktop 2009 folder, and then we've also have a couple of sample template drawings that you can copy to your template folder. And I've already done that on my computer, so let me scroll back up to my C drive here. And what we'll see is in my, I'm using a Civil 3D today, so in my Civil 3D 2009, let me go into the template folder here. And in here we'll see that I have, there we are, my two annotation scale template files. And what they are is they're just the ACAD DWT template where I've gone through and cleaned up the scale list. So the civil scales has all the 1 inch equals a foot, 1 equals 20, 1 equals 30 scales, and the architectural has all the 1/4 inch equals a foot, 1/8 inch equals a foot, and so on type scales in it. All right, so we've done both of those. The program itself, I copied and placed it directly in the Civil 3D folder here. So let me, if I find it here, and I forgot what the program was called. That's not good. Bear with me. Cleanup scales, that's it. All right, let me go back. So in here, so let's go to the C's, and there it is. So it's cleanupscales.exe. You can create a shortcut to this. I'm just going to double click it off the executable here. And then what you do is you browse to the folder that you want to clean up. So I'll maybe come into my directory here and come down to the project I'm working with for today's session. And we'll just pick on the master folder here. And we'll add that, and it will then find every drawing in that folder. You then over here select the template that you want to use. So I'll come in and I will select that civil and open that, and that's the list that I had on here default because that's the one I used last time. And you'll see it has just all those default scales. You can set a threshold to how many scales you're going to allow to be in a drawing. And then when you're done, you pick OK, and it will then go through and clean up the scale list in every one of these drawings that I have selected and place in the values from my template here. So it's a good quick way to clean up a project if you haven't already done so when you began the job. Okay, I'm going to cancel that. Let's come back into my PowerPoint. So that's the cleanup scales. And then we'll also look at, if you saw in the bottom of that last dialog, there was an item there to save visual fidelity. And what that does is it allows you to take a 2009 AutoCAD drawing with annotative objects and open it in 2007. And what AutoCAD will do is it will break the annotative object into versions and sort them to layers based on their drawing scale. So when you open it up in 2007, you'll see a layer for 20 scale, a layer for 40 scale, and so on, depending on what you've assigned your annotative objects. And then you can use layers to turn on and off the display of these annotative objects. When you open that drawing back up in 2009, it recombines them back into the annotative object, and you deal with annotation skills. You only need to work with this if you know your drawings are going to go back and be opened in 2007. If you set the save fidelity variable to 0 or you turn that off, when you open a 2009 drawing in AutoCAD 2007, the objects, the annotative objects, will only display at the scale that the drawing was saved at. All right, the drawing will open again in 2009, and the annotative functionality will return when it's opened up in 2009. All right, so that's the bits on annotation scale. And again, to set your drawing's annotation scale, there's that menu that's available on the status bar with the little scale icon. And here I have a list that I've cleaned up to be just my primary site plan or civil scales that I use. You cannot delete the 1 inch equals 1 foot scale. It has to have that one in there. But then I have just filtered it down to the ones that I want to see. All right. A couple other things you're going to see on that toolbar here. There's these buttons adjacent to it. And let me bring up an image of what those are. The button with the little lightning bolt is controlling the AN auto scale variable. And if that is turned on, whenever you change the drawing or not the drawing scale, the annotation scale, it will automatically assign that scale to every annotative object in your drawing. So every time you change the scale, all of your annotative objects will take on the property for that scale or the size for that scale. All right. If you turn this off, then you have to manually tell the annotative objects which scales they're going to display at. All right, and we'll kind of play with this a little bit today to give you an idea of how those behave and what's going on with that. The second button and variable that we see here is called Anno All Visible, and that when we turn on and off, it will show all annotative objects whether or not they've been assigned to the current scale. So it lets you see everything in your drawing, even though I may be at 20 scale and I have some objects that only display at 10 scale. This allows me to see them all. Caution on this, it does get a little confusing because it does show you everything. These will plot. So if you do have Anno All Visible on and you plot your drawing, you will see all objects even if you didn't assign them to the current scale. So you kind of have to watch that. I typically leave this off and then I only turn it on if I need to select or see some changes in my drawing files. All right, for XREFs, as we finish up today, when we do XREFs, a couple of rules and things we'll talk about. There's a variable called annotative drawing that will actually make your current drawing behave as an annotative object when you use it as an XREF. And I kind of have to quantify that, and that's only going to affect annotative objects within the drawing. Point this out. Really, you shouldn't be concerned with this because AutoCAD will set this by default to 1, which is turning it on when you create annotative objects in the drawing file. So I'm not going to worry about that one too much, but that does show up in the list of variables. All right. A couple of rules for using annotative objects in external references, and it goes back to our scale list of why I showed you those utilities, is you want to make sure that you're using the identical scale list, and more specifically the scale list names in all master files. So for example, I've been using just 1 to 20 as a scale, but if I had another drawing where I use 1 inch equals 20 feet as my scale name, those two aren't going to behave the same when I XREF those drawings because they're actually different scales. Even though they may have the same scale factor, they are different scale names, so I will never be able to display objects from both of those drawings at the same scale. So you need to make sure, again, that you're using the exact same scale list, which is why I showed you that cleanup utility at the beginning of this presentation. All right, and the last thing we're going to see for our XREFs is we need to assign scales to the annotative objects in the master drawing. I can't XREF a drawing and then decide I want my blocks and text to show up at 40 scale. It won't work. I have to go back to that master file, select the objects, and then assign them 40 scale in the master file. So once I've assigned them in the master file, I XREF that. All I can do is change my scale factor or my annotation scale, and they will update based on that. All right, so hopefully this will make a little bit more sense as we go through and work through some of the exercises here. All right. I do have a handout for this class. I am not bothering to show it to you, but if you do go to the CAD support webpage and then search on annotative blocks, there is a HTML version of the handout that goes through and explains all this in more detail, and it will also show you the exercises that I'm going to work through today. All right, so let me switch over to my AutoCAD. All right, so I'm using Civil 3D 2009. I'm not doing any Civil 3D commands. I'm just doing AutoCAD stuff today. But we're going to start off in the drawing, and let me kind of just point out a couple of things. I created this drawing from our default ACAD DWT. Oops, wrong button. I want that button there. And in this DWT file, we have this huge list of annotation scales. I'm not going to use all of these. So the first thing I recommend that when you create a project, start with your template and then go through and clean up your scale list for your project. So I'm going to come in and use the custom button here, and this is the same thing as that annotate edit scale command. What is it? Scale list edit command is what this brings up. And I can come through here and you can see there's a whole bunch of scales, and I'm going to kind of start through. You notice that when I pick on the 1 inch equals 1, I can't delete that one, but I can come down here. I can't delete 1 to 1 either, but I can come and I can start deleting some of these other scales. And I'm not going to use anything this small, so I'm just going to start deleting those. Maybe use 1 to 10. I'm not going to use 1 to 16. I'm not going to use the larger than 1 ratios. And then I'm not going to use any of the architectural ones. So let me just go through real quickly and delete all those. So I can get my list down to here's the 4 or 5 scales that I know I want to use when I work on my drawing. All right. I'll go ahead and, well, I'm not going to pick OK yet. Let me go through. We can also add scales. So say, maybe I want like a 1 to 60. I'll come in here and just kind of move that off so we can see. And I'll try to follow the same naming convention. And this is just a name. You can type in pretty much whatever you want here. I could say 1 inch equals 60 foot if I'd like. I'm just going to go with the ratios. And then what you do is you specify what your paper units are. So the way we work in AutoCAD typically is we're in imperial units. So that's going to equal 1 inch. Corresponds to what in our drawing units. Well, I want that to be 60. And our drawing units are going to be interpreted as feet, typically in imperial drawings. So it's going to be 1 to 60 is the ratio that you apply. Pick OK, and that will now show up in my list, and I can move them up or down in the list so that way they sort in appropriate order when I'm looking at my annotation scales. So I've got that set up. Let me pick OK to that, and then I can come into my list, and you see it's a much more palatable listing of annotation scales. Right. There's an option down here also to hide XREF scales. If you don't clean up your scale list in your XREFs and you click that and turn that off, this will then show you every annotation scale from all of the XREFs. And if you have the same name, hopefully they all have the same value for the ratio, because it will use the one that's in your drawing. So again, hopefully you're starting to see, boy, yeah, it does help me out if I clean up all my drawings and make sure they have the exact same scale list. This hide XREF scales is real nice if you get drawings from outside consultants and architects who knows what they're going to have in their drawings for scales. So I typically leave that turned on. All right. To create a block now, hopefully everybody knows how to make a block. So if not, this will be a little review on some basic block editing and creation. When we're working with annotation scales, I'm going to create an annotative block that's going to scale based on the value I set here or based on the viewport scale that I select while I'm in paper space. So I want to draw my block at a 1-to-1 scale based on inches. So I'm going to use either the 1-to-1 ratio here or the 1 inch equals a foot scale factor. Both of those are going to set my annotation scale to 1. All right. And that way when I draw my block, I draw it based on that. When I insert the block, and if I know it's an annotative block, I don't want to apply any scale factors to it. I'm going to let the annotation scales control that. And I'm going to make just a real simple little block here. And I'm going to zoom in. I'm going to draw it at 0 here. And this is just a little marker object. And bear with me, I have to see what I have for my dimensioning here. And I'm going to draw it. What layer do we draw blocks on typically? I'm going to draw it on layer 0. That way, let me try that again, layer 0, there we go. That way, when I insert the block on another layer, it will assume the properties of that layer. All right, so again, review, I've set my scale at 1-to-1 for block creation, and I'm going to create my block. So I'm going to draw a circle at 0, and let me make sure I get the right, I'll do it by diameter, 0.25. So 0.25 diameter, so that's 1/4 of an inch is how big that's going to be. So when I insert it at 10 scale, it will scale up and be 2.5 feet. Or if 100 scale, it will be 25 feet. All right, let me add a little bit more to this. And diameter. And a little trick here to fill it in without using a fill pattern, and we've just been doing this for years by doing concentric circles. That way, if you turn fill mode off, or if you use hidden line plotting when you plot, our marker will still have a solid circle. All right, so there's the portion of my block, and what I want to do now is I'm going to put an attribute on here so we can see how the text displays. And I'm going to start off with the style command for a second here, and I want to look at my text styles. To make this easier to work with, I'm going to use an annotative text style. So I need to make a new one. So I'm going to click on New, and I'm just going to use the naming convention we've been using in Lion Desktop for years. I'm going to use L100. But then I'm going to put an A on the end just to let myself know that this is going to be an annotative font. That's kind of the standard that we're trying to promote here at Nolte. So L100A. I'll pick OK to that. So I've got that one selected. So I'm going to use my simplex. And then I want to turn on annotative. And that'll make this an annotative object when I create text and mtext with this style. So the text height will be dynamic based on the annotation scale. So instead of specifying a physical height in the drawing, I specify what the paper height is, and then AutoCAD will scale that based on the annotation scale. So I want this to be 1/10 of an inch high, so I type in 0.1. I can also, for annotation, that's hard for me to say sometimes, annotative text, we can tell it to match the orientation of the layout. So if we do a D-view twist in our layouts, the text will always be horizontal. It'll actually rotate to match the view. For today, I'm going to leave that turned off just so we're not having a whole lot of movement going on our items to deal with here. So we're just going to use this to control the text type. All right, and I'm going to set that one current and close that down. So that's going to be my current text style. AutoCAD also indicates that it's an annotative style, and it puts a little scale section here on there. So hopefully everybody knows what a triangular scale is. Hopefully we have some people who've done some drafting and whatnot in the past. All right, so I've got my scale. I got my text style set up, so now I'm going to use the attribute command. So HTDEF is the attribute definition. All right, in there, let me go ahead and give this a name. We'll call this ID. Put in a prompt, put in a default. We'll just say default A-1. I'm going to justify I like top center for these. Here's where I pick my style. I could tell it that this attribute is going to be annotative, but we're embedding it in a block that will be annotative, so it will ignore this setting. So right now, since I'm making my block annotative, it doesn't matter what I do here. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and leave that turned off. We'll set the rotation, and we'll pick OK, and I'll just insert it. I'm just going to eyeball it for today, so we'll place it right there. So I've got now my geometry, I've got my attribute. I can keep building and adding more attributes, but I'm ready to make my block now, so I'm going to use the block command, and we'll put in a name. I'll call it marker number 1. Base point, since I created it 0, 0, I'll leave that at 0. I will select my objects, so we'll highlight all of those. I'm going to tell it to retain them because I'm going to make a couple more blocks from this geometry, and that way I don't have to redraw it. So we're going to go ahead and retain that as opposed to converting it or deleting it. And here's where I tell it I want to make this an annotative block. So this block will have annotative properties. And again, if I wanted to work with rotation to where these are always going to show up orthogonal to my view, so if I D-view twist, I can say, well, go ahead and turn that on and maintain that rotation relative to the viewport. And then the rest are just regular block settings. And I do need to, I did select my objects, didn't I? I can never remember, so let me verify that. So I do have my objects, and we're ready to go. Pick OK. All right, so I have my block defined, and what I'll do is we've got this pipeline here, we're going to, our survey line or whatever, and I'm going to put in some blocks on that. So let me throw it to that layer. And we'll go to the, try insert, there we go, insert command. All right, and we got all my blocks here. So I pick on my marker 1 block. AutoCAD over here on the icon or the image shows you a little scale icon that lets you know this is an annotative block. All right, so I'm going to specify the insertion point, and then for my block scale, since I'm using the annotation scale to control its size, I'm going to leave this as at 1. All right, if I want to make one that's twice as big, I'd go to 2, but I don't want to put in 10 scale or 20 scale. All right, and before I pick OK, I can see I've got a slight problem here. in that my drawing scale is still set at 1:1. So let me cancel this. All right, I kind of have to make sure, so I'm going to come back in. Hopefully you see by my mistake, hey, not fatal. We can go back in and change it afterwards, but I want this drawing maybe to be a 20 scale. So I'm going to set my annotation scale to 1:20, and then I'll go back into my insert command, make sure I type it. All right, so again, I'm going to specify insertion on screen. My scale will be 1. My block scale will be 1, rotational 0. We'll pick OK, and we'll go ahead and throw it on the end of my line here. We'll go ahead and take the default. All right, so we can see now that it came in and it size-wise compared. So here's where the original objects are at 1:1. Here's the version at 20 scale. All right, well, let me change my annotation. A couple of things before I change my scale. A couple of buttons here. My annotation visibility, it's turned on. The light bulb is yellow, so that tells me when I change annotation scales, I will see all annotative objects. All right. And the other one that's on right now is the automatic annotation scale. And what will happen is with this on, it will automatically apply the scale to any of these objects. So let me go ahead. I'm going to turn off visibility. I've only got one in here, so it's not going to be bad. But I'm going to go ahead and leave this auto anno scale option turned on. And when I change my scale to 40, what you'll see is the block doubles in size because it's automatically applied to that 40 scale. Let me turn that off now. So I'm going to toggle that off so it's grayed out now. And then I'll change my scale to, say, 1:10. And what will happen is that block disappears because we've got the show all turned off, and we've also got the automatically add. All right, so at 10 scale it doesn't show up, but it will show up at 20 scale, and it will show up at 40 scale. All right, it's all the same block. All right, so let me go back to 10 scale. Doesn't show up if I want to see it. I can say turn on show all, so it'll show me that block, and if I want to add it, I can select it, right mouse click, and go into my annotative object scale option, which you get when you pick annotative objects, and I can either add the current scale, delete the current scale, or they have a dialog where you can come in here and it shows you all the scales on this object, and I can say, well, I didn't want that one to show up at 40 scale. I can delete that, or I can come in here and add, pick from my scale list and say, yep, let's add 40 back in, or add 10 back in. Okay, I can say, well, add 10. All right, and we can add those in, pick OK, and now this object will display at my 10 scale. All right, so let me do this again. Let me switch it back to 40 scale. Did I turn that one off for 40? I thought, oops, didn't get 40 scale, so it didn't like me adding and deleting in the same session, so add that back in. So we got that one back at 40. So that one will show up at 10, 20, and 40. I'm at 40. Let me insert another block here. Everything is set before. We'll throw this one on the end there. We'll call this one A-2. And this one comes in, and again, you'll see that it, by default, gets whatever the current annotation scale is. So let me come in here and pick that. Go into my list here, and we'll see it's automatically assigned the scale that was current when the block was created. All right, so that's kind of hopes to give you an idea of what's going on with these. In terms of paper space, close that. All right, let me make a viewport real quick here. All right, so in my viewport, instead of having annotation scale here, you get the same scale list, but this is actually the viewport scale. So let me make sure. So I've got my display turned off. So I'm going to go to 10 scale, and we'll see at 10 scale only the first block shows up. If I go to 20 scale, only the first one shows up, but it resizes. And then when I go to 40 scale, I get both of them. All right, and then to show you the rotation capability, if I do a D view, twist, and we'll twist it around at some odd angle and rotate, you'll see that both of those blocks maintain their orthogonal rotation relative to my viewport. So even though I twisted the viewport, the blocks maintain that rotation. So this is real powerful when I bring these blocks in, that I can D-view, twist it however I want, and they will display based on that. So let me go back to 20 scale here, and then same thing back to 10 scale, and we'll see they keep maintaining that relative location. And you should see, relative to my piece of paper, that 1/4 inch diameter is still going to be a 1/4 inch no matter which scale I pick here. So let me change that back to 20 here. Okay, so you can see my relative to paper space, the size is not changing. So that is an annotative block. And let me mess up and confuse you just a little bit, and I'm going to create a block now with an annotative attribute. All right, so let me zoom back in. I'm going to change my scale back to 1 because I'm going to be working in here. And let me zoom back in on my marker. Regen this. Let me erase that. What I'm going to do is I'm going to scale my circles here because they're no longer going to be annotative. I'm going to say scale it by 20. All right. So that way we'll see that my symbol is going to be that big because this is not going to be an annotative block. But I'm going to put in an annotative attribute. So ATTDEF. Let me make sure I'm on layer 0. Okay, ATTDEF. And for my tag, I'm just going to use the same thing, ID, I forget what I call it, ID number. And we'll go B's on these, B1, and I'll do the same location. Again, I'm using annotative text just so I know the text height and everything are going to be okay right here. But now I'm going to turn on the annotative option here, and this will create an annotative attribute, and this only works if the block you create is not annotative. All right, so we'll pick OK to that, and then we'll insert it right there. All right, little confusing because it's real tiny here. So maybe what I want to do is, let's go back to 20 scale, and we will assign that scale. There we go. So now that's what it'll look like when I'm at 20 scale. Okay, so we can see this is, if I select it, right-click, you'll see I do have the annotative scale options. And for an attribute, I find it doesn't matter what scales I assign to it, the attribute will take on whatever the current scale is when you insert the block. All right, so I've got just regular geometry. I've got an annotative attribute, so I'm going to make a block out of this now, and we'll call this one marker number 2. I'll go ahead and leave it at 0. I'm going to select my objects. I'm going to retain my objects, and I'm going to leave annotative turned off. I don't want the block to be annotative, so let me pick OK to that. So I've got my block definition now. All right, so we'll come and throw these in over here. Let me set current layer. We'll put those on the text 2 layer, and we will insert. All right, so this time I'm going to use my marker 2, and what we'll see, the icon or the image over here, the little scale icon is not visible because this is not an annotative block, but the attribute within it is annotative. All right, so I've got that one selected. We'll pick OK. We'll throw it on the end there. We'll give it the same name. So there is my block. It came in just fine, but what we'll see now is, let me turn off annotation visibility so we're at 20 scale. When I change this to 10 scale, we'll see this block resizes. This one does not resize, but the attribute disappears. Okay. So let me change it to 20 scale. So there they are at 20 scale that I created them at. So this one resizes because it's got 20 scale in this list. This one, again, the overall block size does not change, but my attribute is displayed. And when I go to 40 scale, you'll see both of these resize and scale and display at 40 because they have that scale assigned. But this one, the attribute disappears, and being that the block is not annotative, we'll see that our annotative object scales is grayed out. And the reason I did this exercise is if you create an annotative attribute, it will only insert and display, or the attribute will only display at the scale in which it was inserted. So I'm at 40 scale, so let me insert another version of this block. And that's good. Pick OK, and we'll throw it to the end. Okay. Again, you see the attribute came in. It did resize based on the annotative scale, but I changed that now back to 20 scale, and that one disappears, and this one reappears. Not sure of the application for this, but I just wanted to make you aware of that behavior. All right, one last one here. So let me change my scales back to 1-to-1 and come down, and we'll look at my objects here. Oops, and I got to turn everything on. So there's that little attribute I made. So let me erase that. All right, so ignoring attributes now, I want to create a block with annotative objects within the block, and these are not attributes, because attribute, because the way a block's inserted, has that unique behavior. But I'm going to just put in some text. So I'm using my annotative style here, so I'm just going to do some dtext. And it's saying, hey, you're using an annotative style. Do you really want to use 1-to-1? So I'm going to say, okay, assign it 1-to-20. Pick OK. And let's justify, we're going to do top center. I'm just going to eyeball it right there. Marker 1. Okay, so there's that. Actually, I put it on the wrong layer. Let me change that to layer 0. Okay, so I now have my symbol. I have my annotative text. And what I'd like to do is add and delete scales. And before I define the block, I need to tell the text which scales are you going to appear. So right now it's assigned to 1-to-20. I'm going to say, well, I want to see that at 40. And I can also use Control and Shift to select multiple. So maybe I'll pick 40 and 60 here, and we'll pick OK to that. So those are added to the list. Pick OK. And now when I create my block, we'll call this one marker number 3. Leave it at 0. This time I'll go ahead and delete just to clean my file up. Select my objects. All right. And again, I want to leave my block behavior. I want the annotation option turned off, because that will override the annotative text option. So we're going to say, no, the block is not annotative. We'll pick OK. And, oh, I need more line work here. So we'll extend our line out, and then we'll go ahead, let's go ahead and leave it on that layer, and then we'll just insert, and I'll use marker number 3. All right. Again, the scale, I forgot, oh, I'm at 20 scale, so I did set my annotation scale to 20 here. So there's my block. It is not an annotative block, but the text is annotative, so we'll pick OK to that. And we'll go ahead, and if I can type in end, we'll throw in, oh, I'll do another one. Something tells me I messed up on my block here. Okay. All right, let me try my annotation scale here. There's 40. Okay, I made my text too small because I forgot to scale it based on the original height. I apologize for that, so I need to fix my block here. I should have set it at the scale I was going to default at, but it's showing me. But as I change through here, we'll see as I change the scale here, it will resize. All right, the block doesn't resize, but if I choose a scale that was not applied to that text object, so I go to 30 scale, and then I turn off the show all option here, we'll see that that text value goes away. All right, I would go through and fix my block and apply the right scale factor to that. I'm not going to. I want to move on with this file. So hopefully you kind of saw the 3 different combinations of an annotative block, a block with an annotative attribute, or a block with annotative objects. And I can actually embed annotative blocks in a block and control the behavior. And we saw on the last example with the annotative block, the block with the annotative text, I had to pre-assign the scales. And the reason I did that one last, because that leads me right into the last part of this presentation, talking about X-referencing this drawing. You have to assign your annotation scales in the master file before we do the XREF. All right, so we'll see on these objects, just to quickly review a couple. If I look at the scales, this one's at 10, 20, and 40. This one, if we look at the annotation scale, it doesn't have any, but the attribute in this case was set to 20 scale. Actually, I'll just go ahead and show them to you. So there's everything that shows up. That's what we'll see at 10. That's what we get at 20. 30, I got those. So again, these blocks aren't annotative, so they don't disappear, but their attributes and text will. Go to 40, the text and attributes show up. And then I go to 60, Okay, so we get that. So we'll go ahead and I'll leave this drawing. I'll go ahead and leave it at 20 scale. So let me save that. And we'll make a new file. I'm going to start with the same template. Pick OK. All right, and the first thing I want to do is just clean up this horrendous scale list. So we'll go ahead and come into custom, and I'll just start deleting quickly all the ones I'm not going to use. I went a little bit far. That's fine. So I got rid of all those. We'll pick OK, and then I want to xref, and we're going to attach. And I wasn't paying attention where I saved my drawing. Actually, I think it's in the working folder here. There it is. So there's my file. It's called annotated blocks. So I'm going to attach that, and we'll go ahead for now. Just put it on layer 0, not standard. Go ahead and take all the defaults here. I'm not going to worry about that. Zoom extents. All right, so there's my objects. The reason we see everything is if we look down at our toolbar here, we'll see that anno visibility is turned on. So let me turn that off. So now we can see at 1:1, I get the same behavior. You'll see I don't have the 60 scale here because I didn't add it to this drawing, but if I turn off the hide, we should now see, there it is, 1:60 xref. And this is where we start running into problems because it does put this xref name on here. Well, if I had it as a different name in a different external reference, like say 1 inch equals 60, I would have both a 1:60 xref and a 1 inch equals 60 foot xref, and they are not the same annotation scale, even though they have the same ratio. So you kind of have to watch that. All right, so if I click on that one, you'll see these two where I assigned 60 will show up. All right, but I'm going to go back in here. So 1:1, nothing shows up. And 1:10, so this one shows up and rescales. And we'll see that everything that I applied in terms of the annotation scales to those objects in the master file, I will get as I work through the different scales in my drawings. So I had to pre-assign those because if we select our xref, and we'll see, hey, there's no annotation capability whatsoever to an external reference. All right, and if I do go to my layout here and see if I can get M-viewed, and we'll look at that rotation. Yep. Twist, and we'll just flip it around like that. Okay, and we'll see that these objects are going to rotate even though they're embedded in my xref, whereas the other ones I did not put in the rotate option. Okay, so here we are through an xref, and I need to set my scale. We'll go to 40. There we are, and turn that off. That's why, oh, that was on. Okay. And now we can see that they will rotate. All right, go back into model. So I just kind of want to stress that. So the xref behaves just like our block with annotative text embedded. The xref is a block with annotative objects. You need to set the annotation scales in the source drawing. You know, I can switch back to this drawing. Oop. Let me go back this way. Let's switch back to that drawing, and I'll go ahead and, actually I don't want these. Let me turn all of these on. So I'm going to say select similar. So I'm going to grab all of those and come into my annotative scales, and I'll add in 30 scale for these two. Come back over to my sheet drawing, reload my xref, and then now when I go to 30 scale, I get those two objects in 30 scale. All right, one last thing I'll show you here, and then we'll wrap it up. A couple things is when you have objects with multiple scales assigned to them. Right now I'm looking at only 20 scale objects here. So I have this one here. I can actually grip edit and pull this out while I'm only pulling the version for that scale. So if I change this now back to 40 scale, we'll see there's where the 40 scale version is, and I come back in to 20 scale, and there's where the 20 scale version is. All right. It's kind of nice because, especially with text, because it allows you to move things around so that at different scales they don't overlap with each other. Okay. To fix this, I can come in and right-click on it and under annotation, object scale, there's an option here to synchronize, and it will synchronize them all to the current location. So if I click this now, it's going to move all of those versions to where the green one is located. So we'll go ahead and pick OK to that. So now you see when I select it, they're all right there. So if I move this back to the end of my line, we'll see I left these behind. So again, I can just right-click, annotative, and then synchronize, and that will put them all back at the same location. All right, well, that is everything I intended to show today. So hopefully it gave you guys a good introduction to using the annotative objects, some of the variables associated with that, using the annotative scale list, cleaning that up, and then since we do our master drawing and sheet drawing concept, hopefully you saw how these behave when we XREF them into our sheet drawings. I see no questions typed in, so if you do have a question, oh, there is one. Thank you, folks in Salt Lake. Can an existing block be redefined to be annotative? Well, that's a good question. I am not aware of that. I don't think I can change it. So this one here is not. So let me go into the block editor. And I'm not saying there's really no property in here at this point where I can redefine it. The only thing I can think of is making a new block. Close my block editor. Yep. And let me set it to 1. So we'll try this real quick here. And we'll insert marker 3 at 0, explode it. Okay, and we'll do, I'm just going to throw in just throw an attribute. Not an annotative. That's, bear with me, I'm going to make that a little bit bigger. I forgot I was using that. And again, I'll draw it on the right layer. So, oh, and this is all too big. Because I did it. There we go. So let me make it small because I want to make it annotative. So we'll do block. I will use the same name as marker 3. We'll make it annotative. I will select all the objects. I'll go ahead and delete them. Okay, up, yes. All right. Okay, so now when I change this to 20 scale, they do resize. The problem is my attribute's not there because it redefined the blocks. I'd have to go into the Batman or the attribute synchronization tools and synchronize the attributes on here to get those to display again. So it does look like, yes, I can take a block, recreate it, redefine it, make it an annotative block, and it will change that block definition. It does kind of mess up again with your attributes just because the way AutoCAD deals with attributes on the insertion as opposed to referencing the block. All right, I can't change the block annotation or annotative block with the editing here, and I don't think I can change that on properties. I can disable it. Let me bring properties in here. I can, oh no, it is grayed out here. So you see even in the properties, yes, it's annotative, but I can't change that. Okay, I can't turn that off. So good question. That's one I hadn't thought of. Any other questions? So we're about 10 minutes early here, kind of what I figured we'd do today. So I'd like to thank you all for joining me. Hopefully you got a bit of knowledge out of today's presentation. If you didn't get to see this in its complete, the complete presentation, it will be recorded and saved via the CAD support and CAD forum web pages. Again, thank you. There is a short, not a poll, but a questionnaire when you leave. Basically, it's a NOLTI evaluation form. Please fill that out. For those of you who sat in a large conference room with a bunch of people, could you have somebody send me an email with a list of attendees just so we can kind of keep track of who's participating in these sessions. So thank you very much and have a nice day.